Okay, listen. I might be one of the unluckiest players in Genshin Impact. I know most of us probably feel this way, especially when we have to see all those multiple 5-star pulls that everyone else seems to be getting. But hear me out for a second. Because I managed throughout the whole year of Netlan to lose every single 50-50 while also having to go to pity every time. And trust me, I pulled a lot during those last months. So I kinda already knew when I approached Skirk's banner with just 80 pulls that there was really only one possible outcome for me. It was Mona C4. Now, when you are faced with a situation like this, you can choose between one of two options. Either you help crowdfund their waste next yard, or, well, you can cry in a corner telling yourself that you're going to be okay while you have to wait for a rerun. However, I chose a third option. You see, when I saw the buffs in the Spiral Abyss, which were clearly designed to cater to Skirk of course, I had an idea. So I decided, right then and there, that I would out of pure spite turn one of my oldest 4-star characters into the cryo DPS that Hoyo didn't want me to have. But it wasn't just stopping there, because I set myself the goal of also getting 36 stars in the Spiral Abyss with said character. Okay, but let us start from the beginning. You are probably wondering why the character I chose for this is a nun with a drinking problem. Well, to be honest, the main reason for this is that she was one of my first DPS characters when I started playing Genshin. I already knew back then that she was better suited to be a sub DPS, but I still enjoyed to play her as my on-field carry. Now that might sound crazy to some, but I think my next best choice was my first and only 5-star for a long time, Gigi. You know, maybe my account is cursed. Anyway, there are however also some practical reasons why I chose Rosaria as my on-field damage dealer, not only back then, but also for this challenge. First of all, her normal attack multipliers are surprisingly high, even higher than many of the 5-star Polam characters. Although, to be fair, they all have ways of further increasing the damage scalings, so it's not like we can expect Arlecchino levels of damage here. But it's still worth pointing out, since we will have to rely on normal attacks for when she is on field. Besides that, her elemental skill lets her dash behind smaller enemies while dealing a sizable amount of cryo damage. In combination with its very short cooldown of just 6 seconds, this can easily be used multiple times in a rotation, and so there's at least something else to do besides mindlessly poking our enemies with a stick. And lastly, there's her first constellation that buffs attack speed and normal attack damage by 10% after landing a crit. 10% isn't much, but it does synergize with a higher normal attack scalings. Now, to be fair, in hindsight, I have to admit these reasons really aren't that convincing. But I was still determined at the time to make this work. So, since for some reason I got it into my head that I want to bring an old 4-star character as my main DPS into the Abyss that was designed for the latest top DPS character, I needed to find a team that would be strong enough to even have a chance at getting 36 stars. To me, that decision was basically clear from the start. It needed to be a freeze team. Not only to compete on the same playing field as Skirk, but also because I thought it would generally be the best option here. I have thought about other options. Rosaria is quite strong in meld teams, for example, but I don't have any of the newer characters which could elevate this team comp. So the only version of this team I could play is with the same characters that have been used since the early days of Genshin. And to me, that just felt a bit boring, even though it might still be viable today. I even thought about going the physical route at one point, after seeing that her C6 is able to shred physical resistance. Roughly 5 seconds later, however, I managed to wake up from my fever dream and realized that I don't have as much copium as a Eula main. Sorry guys, still love you. So in the end, freeze was the only option. Luckily, I've been awaiting Skirk's release for a long time, which allowed me to meticulously plan my pulling decisions to gather every single character for the ideal freeze team. And that's totally the reason, not the fact that I have a crippling gambling addiction with zero self-control, which makes me mindlessly hammer the pull button every patch. Anyway, my first choice fell on Farina. Her team-wide buffing mechanic is still to this day unmatched and in my mind the obvious choice when you are trying to give your weird off-meta pick the best chances of succeeding. An alternative option could have been Yelan, however, since my Yelan is C2 because of accidents, I felt like it would skew the team's damage distribution a bit too much towards her, and I still wanted to keep Rosaria as my main source of damage. So Farina had to be the one, and she is still able to provide some personal damage of her own thanks to her little army of deranged sea creatures. Now, in order to offset the constant mental damage the team has to suffer from them, as well as to boost Farina's fanfare generation, I needed a healer. Luckily, when Hoyo designed Escoffier's kit, they decided to turn her into a Swiss army knife that can do absolutely everything, including healing. However, the main reason for her spot on the team is her insane hydro and cryo resistant shredding of up to 55%. This ability makes freeze teams even viable in the first place, and also makes her kinda irreplaceable in this case. Now, could you make it work without her? Sure, but I decided that I personally value the little ounce of sanity I have left, so here we are. The last spot on the team is where things got interesting though. For Skirk's case, Shanna would be the go-to choice. Even more resistant shredding, as well as a strong damage buff for cryo characters. However, for my Rosaria team, I'm not going to use her. Instead, I decided to use Chongyun. Now, why the hell would I ditch a premium support for a 4-star with a below 1% usage rate, you may ask? Well, let me remind you of where this idea of me turning Rosaria into a main DPS started. One of the buffs in Abyss is a 75% increase to cryo normal attack damage. Rosaria normally has no way of utilizing this buff. Well, unless she gets a little help from Chongyun. Because it turns out that if a character with a sword, polearm or claymore stands in the circle created by his elemental skill, they get a cryo infusion. Meaning, Rosaria's normal attacks can now all of a sudden take advantage of the buff in the Spiral Abyss. But that's not all. Since we also have Escoffier on the team, damage is even further increased thanks to the lowered resistances. Okay, now that I've let you in on my vision for the team, let us quickly go over how I decided to build each of the characters. Farina uses a pretty standard build of 4-piece golden troop with a Fav sword to provide some additional energy to the team. Nothing special here. Next was my Escoffier. She has a signature, and yes, I know the weapon buff does help quite a bit, but my genius thought of a way to offset it. Trust me, we are getting to that in a second. Her artifacts are also a bit of a mess. I had to rely on a 2-piece build, since my golden troop pieces are quite horrendous and I could only make one build work for Farina. Then we have Chongyun, who, to be honest, I just gave the next best thing I found, which was a Fav weapon again, to make ER requirements a bit smoother for when I would inevitably mess up my rotations. For artifacts, I would have loved to use Noblesse. However, me being the stupid idiot that I am, I forgot to change Chongyun's artifacts before the run, and so I had to play with him being on Millilith. So instead of getting a 20% attack buff for 12 seconds, the buff only lasted 3 seconds, and in reality Rosaria could probably make use of only 2 or 1 of that. Yeah, I think that should compensate a bit for the weapon on Escoffier. And finally, we have the star of the show, Rosaria. And building her really turned out to be quite a challenge. My first instinct was to go for the Marshal Hunter set, since we have Arena on a team who can activate its effect even for Rosaria. However, what makes this artifact set usually so strong is the fact that it provides a large amount of crit rate, which makes balancing crit values for a character a lot easier. But since my team already gets 15% crit rate from the Cryo Resonance, and my only polearm choices for her are either the Jade Winged Spear or Deathmatch, it becomes nearly impossible to not overcap on crit rate. I would have essentially needed artifact pieces with only crit damage rolls to make this set even worth using. And I think I've established by now that I don't have an ounce of luck in this game, so that's off the table. Meaning I needed another option. Just using a simple 2-piece build could have been an okay choice, however I decided to go instead with Gladiator's Finale. While the set is on paper just worse than Marshal Hunter, it does increase normal attack damage by 35%, and since I'm already heavily investing in Rosaria's normal attacks, it seemed like a good alternative. So I doubled down and settled for this set. And as I alluded to earlier, the weapon choice ended up being the Jade Winged Spear, simply because it didn't have any other comparable options, But at least Rosaria will be able to make use of its passive, since she's going to spend some time on field. With that done, I had assembled the team and completed all the builds, so there was really only one thing left to do: beat the Spiral Abyss. But before we go over my Abyss one, let's quickly talk about my goals here. Obviously, I wanted to 36-star the Abyss, but that wasn't my only goal. You see, since I always could rely on a way stronger team to clear the first half in order to get more time on Rosaria's side, I wanted her team to clear their side in less than 90 seconds. Because that's half of the time you have to clear a chamber to get full stars. While this is of course not a perfect metric, since not all sides of a chamber are usually created equal, I still think it's a decent enough way to feel out whether a team can hold their own or not. And that was quite important to me, since I wanted to see if this team is even remotely viable and can be considered a viable replacement for Skirk in this case. Now with that said, let's see if I can clear this Abyss with my budget version of Skirk. The first chamber consists of 2 waves. It starts off with 2 rune units, which, thanks to the fact that I'm playing a freeze team, are unable to do anything. Although I'm never really sure if they are even capable of doing anything. Except, in this case of course, costing me precious time. So, getting rid of them as efficiently as possible was quite important. Luckily, they stay close together, which makes it easy to deal damage to both of them at the same time. The real challenge of this chamber would come in the second wave. It's everyone's favorite Rubik's Cube with an identity crisis, the Perpetual Mechanical Array. I swear someone at Hoiverse thinks they are really funny by putting this thing in almost every Abyss rotation. Anyways, this thing is specifically designed to cost you as much time as possible with its constant immunity phases. On top of that, I also faced some challenges that are specific to my team. You see, the array tends to move a lot with its sword attack, which can easily result in situations where it moves outside of Rosaria's burst or Chongyun's elemental skill, resulting in a not so insignificant loss in damage. Luckily, I was at least able to make the best out of its rocket attack, where it flies into the air before crashing down on you, by repositioning myself inside my circles. The real tricky part, however, comes when it splits up. I had to find a good balance of not committing too much of my abilities into the smaller robot that needs to be defeated before being able to attack the core again. Otherwise, I would run into situations where Rosaria's and Chongyun's ability were placed too far away from the core, and I had not enough damage to finish it off. However, after 1 or 2 retries, I was able to clear it in 82 seconds. This is clearly no speedrun time, and I'm pretty sure there was still a lot of room for optimization, but I had achieved my goal of being under 90 seconds, which I was happy with, so I went on to Chamber 2. I initially thought that this chamber would be pretty easy compared to the one before, however it turned out that I would struggle quite a bit more here. Even though I had a lot of cryo applicators, which in theory should help a lot against both the Electro Abyss Lector as well as the Seahorse, I had to retry this chamber multiple times. Now the Abyss Lector here really wasn't a big deal, unless of course my brain was unable to comprehend the idea of pressing the dodge button at the right time. The Seahorse, on the other hand, gave me quite a tough time. And the main reason for this, to be completely honest, was just my own stupidity. Now, to be fair to me, it has been quite a long time since I last fought against it, but I was struggling to keep it from rising into the air, which would cost me too much time. In my mind, I was pretty sure the moment when it does this move is time-based. So I got extremely confused when it sometimes decided to peace out mere seconds after starting the fight. Well, it turns out that the trigger condition is in fact not time-based. Instead, it happens when the shield reaches 50%. Meaning, me trying to spam all of my abilities right at the start meant that I only made it worse, since I wouldn't be able to break the shield in time before it did its thing. Fortunately, once I realized my stupid mistake, it was pretty easy, and I cleared the second half of the second chamber in just 1 minute and 18 seconds. And with that, it was now time for the last and final chamber that stood between me and 36-starring the Abyss with my Wish.com version of Skirk. This one consisted of only one enemy, which also had been just recently added to the game: the Secret Source Automaton Overseer device. Listen, I swear to God, at this point they are just throwing together random words that sound cool. Anyway, I would have loved to tell you now that this was the most challenging fight of them all. The one that took me the most retries, the one where I had to come up with the one right strategy to defeat it. However, the reality was, this thing ended up being a glorified training dummy. Since I had so much cryo application in my team, its whole gimmick of having to lower its meter was pretty trivial. And with just one attempt, I managed to defeat it in just 1 minute and 15 seconds. And therefore, 36 star the Abyss with my main DPS, Rosaria. Now, in conclusion, does this mean that DPS Rosaria is a valid Skirk replacement? Hell no. I mean, I was able to comfortably clear the Abyss even in one continuous run, but even I am not as delusional to ignore the fact that Skirk would clear the same chambers in probably half the time. But I think that was pretty much clear from the start. There are clearly countless better teams to play, of course, and this is not anything to try to make endgame content easier, but to me this whole experiment was at the end of the day a lot of fun. Losing a 50-50 of course always sucks, trust me, I have experience, especially if you don't have enough pulls to get the 5-star you wanted. But I think it can be quite enjoyable from time to time to turn your shit luck into an opportunity to get a little creative with your characters and team comps. Nevertheless, I succeeded in my mission, and in the process, I've also proven to myself that I don't necessarily need the new shiny DPS character. Which is why I've made a decision to save my guarantee after my lost 50-50 and not go for Skirk. Even though there would still be more than enough pulls for me to secure a copy. Now, don't get me wrong, I still want my hot Abyss waifu, and I will get her on her rerun eventually, but for now, I'm happy with my off-meta main DPS Rosaria. Now, with that, we've reached the end. If you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, have a great day, and most importantly, good luck with your wishes. Bye!